The staff, myself, everything we do is about protecting plants, conservation, biosecurity and biodiversity. And that's what we do every day. So I feel it's very fitting that we are here to watch this exceptional film. And I also have the great pleasure of introducing the High Commissioner, the British High Commissioner, Vicky Trudell, wonderful for being here, and Her Excellency Francesca Diodali, Ambassador to Italy. Thank you for, sorry if I get it right, so obviously to Australia. So welcome to both of you, and it's a real pleasure to have you here in the gardens. So thank you very much, and I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's my turn now. Thank you. Thank you very much, and welcome every one of you. And you will have certainly read this event's brief that has been distributed in advance. So you have enough background information as to the context into which this gathering takes place. But I would like to underline one additional point, namely that this is part of the United Kingdom, Italy, COP26 Australia Working Group Action Plan. And in the run-up to the UNF3C Conference of the Party number 26, COP26, Vicky and I, and our respective diplomatic and consular network across Australia will continue to engage with Australia throughout the entire year to keep the drumbeat of ambition alive. When it comes to the results and achievement, the international community has to agree in Glasgow. Passing by Milano, of course, as the preparatory events that Italy leads and hosts in Milano are of functional relevance for the success of the final negotiations in Glasgow. Their outcome will be fundamental in determining Glasgow level of ambition and in trying to resolve most contentious aspects that are still, unfortunately, on the table. Now, a few words about synergies between the objectives of COP26 and the agenda of the Italian G20 presidencies. And this year, I think it's really all planets are aligned, because Italy is chairing G20, UK is chairing G7. So that's really great. And as G20 presidency, Italy is implementing a more integrated approach between climate and energy, climate and economy, including finance, climate and health, and so on. And there is no trade-off. Those are all factors of the same equation, and we need this planet, we need all people and wildlife and flora and fauna to live here a prosperous life. Now, tonight we will look to the facts. And as the Latin, our ancestors used to say, contra factum non valet argumentum. Facts cannot be disputed. And it's very important to remember this in a world of massive disinformation, sometimes deliberate, often only consequences of lack of knowledge, unfortunately. And when it comes to fighting climate change, facts are, and I'm quoting now, 2021 is a make or break year to confront the global climate emergency. The science is clear. To limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we must cut emissions by 45% by 2030 from 2010 levels, end of quote. This quote comes from the UN Climate press release following the publication of the initial National Determined Contribution Synthesis report. And so where is my own country? Where is Italy on this? In a nutshell, we are doing overall well. Yes, we do, but we do have also a lot of work to do. And you can find online the detailed report, for example, about the 2020 SDG implementation, where Italy is on this. Certainly, my country within the European Union and as one of its member states, with the 2019 Green Deal and moreover with the Next Generation EU initiative, everything that is done in the coming years must and will be directed to achieving climate neutrality by 2050, and the Italian government has clearly committed to this goal, together with the UK and many other ambitious countries. And also, as far as Italy is concerned, we do commit to the European Union new climate targets by 2030. This is good, yes, but there is no space for complacency, not at all. One pill, just one last concept on the narrative. You know, we go green or we get jobs. No, there is no trade-off. The EU facts demonstrates that on going green within the necessary and agreed time frame does not mean loss of jobs. To the contrary. And I think that there are clear examples of this in the UK too. So each country has a great responsibility in implementing concrete, lasting solutions, including a firm commitment to providing responses to climate change, land degradation, biodiversity loss, and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals enshrined in the 2030 UN Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francesca. It's fantastic to stand alongside you yet again in our amazing programme of joint effort across Australia. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're wondering who this woman is standing here burbling away, I'm Vicky Trudell, the British High Commissioner, and our partnership with Italy this year and beyond. Francesca and I were talking earlier, it's not just what our two nations do today as we partner on the road to COP26. It is actually what we all collectively do together in the years to come. Shortly, I will introduce our panel and invite them onto the stage with me. But Francesca is absolutely right. We can stand here and talk a good fight. But for both our nations and all of those who are on board on this vital agenda, it is also about the way we walk the talk. So today there was a new publication. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to look up Italy's statistics, but Britain came out as the second most successful nation in reducing carbon emissions. CO2 emissions declined in the UK on an average of 3.6% per annum between 2016 and 2019. And I'm sure we will have improved on that over the last year. So when we talk about ambition towards COP26 in November in Glasgow, where we stand today is not good enough. So when we talk about ambition, when we work with partners and allies, as we seek to persuade that this is not a binary choice between a target of net zero by 2050 or having a technology-driven solution. Actually, you need the combination of both. Targets drive behaviors. Government positions on legislation, on policy, are vital to that, to create the right environment in order to deliver the quantum change that we actually need. Tonight, we will be watching a film screening of David Attenborough's Extinction: The Facts. I warn you now, there are some uncomfortable scenes that some of us may find difficult to watch, but it really brings home the message. The interconnectedness between climate change and biodiversity loss should not be underestimated. That is why nature-based solutions, not just technology, nature-based solutions are a vital part of the equation. And in countries, developing economies that cannot afford high-end technology, there is a responsibility for the developed world to support that. And here, Australia is playing an important role particularly in your near neighborhood in the Southwest Pacific. So nature-based solutions like returning the mangroves where they have been decimated, for example, how we look after the land and our water bodies. And I know Denise started with the acknowledgement of the original custodians of this land, the indigenous agenda, returning to some of the understanding on nature-based solutions is important. So in Glasgow, the indigenous community will gather too, to share their ancient knowledge of how to look after the land. And that is also important. For us, our nature-based campaign recognizes this inextricable link, and I think you will see in the film why this is so important. Natural systems are on the front line of the fight against climate change, both because they are affected by climate change. I mean, the Federation of Farmers here have come out for net zero by 2050 because drought is a real issue, floods are a real issue, increased high winds, the unpredictability of climate. How do we cope with that? How do we find the resilience in the natural order for huge farming economies, which Australia is, and many of our nations? How do we adapt in order to deliver food security of the future, water security of the future? Indeed, the existential threat that some of the Pacific Island nations and other island nations are already facing. This is a security agenda as well, because if your nation disappears underwater or fresh water becomes salinated, there is no future. Mass migration, if we're looking at worst case scenarios, heading to the developed world, it will be climate migration, not economic migration. If we want nations, particularly the most vulnerable, to survive, and also for our nations to survive, action is required now. So we are taking it seriously alongside Italy, and we invite others to join us in this endeavour. So on that note, let's get on to our panel discussion and make sure I haven't lost my place in all of this. If I could invite Professor Benedetta Brevini, an academic and journalist, to take her place on the stage, Dr. Emma Camp, marine biologist and a UN Young Leader, Denise Ora, who we've met earlier, the Chief Executive of the Royal Botanical Gardens, and Derek Lath of Ferrero, Australia, because the voice of business and industry is really important. Right. So Denise, maybe I can start with you. You mentioned earlier the important role and vision you see for the Botanic Gardens, and it's a great example of ways in which you are helping to tackle biodiversity loss. I should not have had that glass of Prosecco, but it was very good, Francesca, thank you. Perhaps we can start on an optimistic front and ask you to tell us a bit about what we can all do to tackle some of the biodiversity issues, and indeed those we'll see raised by Sir David in the film later.
Good question. So the work at the gardens obviously is always about conservation. We have a living collection. But something I always want everyone to think about is the true cost. And it's always, do we put an economic value on biodiversity? And interesting things, I tend to look at what are nature's services, or what I would call ecosystem services. Things like what nature does for us that we think is free, but it has a cost. Things like water purification, carbon sequestration. We've also got natural pollinators from an agricultural space. So interesting enough, the cost to that, I think in 2019-2020 report was roughly around 140 trillion US dollars, which is really interesting because when you talk about it in economic terms, that's a lot of money. And when you then go, okay, well, since 1970, through land degradation and through other land cover changes and things like that, you're then starting to lose $20 to $30 trillion a year. So the question I always say is the work we do is really important. I can do rewilding, we look at natural seed propagation, all sorts of things. But it's how much are we prepared, or what value are we prepared to lose in basically saying, what are we going to do? And so at the Gardens, the whole philosophy we have is what can we do to help nature's services?
You're like a Noah's Ark.
Oh, we are. That's what it's like, evolved. Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come back and pick up some of those themes. It's so important. And I know Hugh does something similar. And, you know, if we think it's not real, the bushfires of last year and the threat to some of your endemic species here, you know, where are the seed banks if we lose?
Very much. We partner a lot with you.
Yeah. So, Benedetta, if I may come to you next, you've written extensively about climate issues, both in the media and in your books. What do you think we need to do successfully to educate people about climate and biodiversity issues, and who should we be targeting with those messages?
Well, I think this is really an excellent question. I think that there are two categories of people that we are targeting. First, politicians, and secondly, citizens. And I will start with politicians because just last Friday, we saw that the UN published a very significant report that showed precisely what you were discussing earlier, which was like that the emissions have been in the current pledges that have been submitted by states have been only reduced by 1%. Like now, 1% is nowhere enough, close enough to what you said earlier, right? About the fact that we absolutely need to reduce by almost 50% by 2030. So, like, why is that? Why does it have to be so difficult? And we know that we have major hurdles, right? But we also know that, especially this year, this is really the most significant COP edition, I would say, of the latest, like since the Paris Agreement, at least. So I would start with try to really educate. How do we educate politicians about it? I'm a media scholar, and I know that we run a lot of studies on where does a politician take their news, like where do they develop their knowledge about climate change? And a very significant finding was that they very often rely on media and news. And then I'm going to the second point that I wanted to make, which was we need to make sure that the media are delivering in the interest of the public. So how do we achieve that? I mean, it's absolutely a mission that we can embark upon. Dealing with media regulation in the public interest should not be something to be running away from. It's, for example, at the moment in this country, there is a fantastic opportunity. There is, at the Senate, a media diversity inquiry. What a fantastic, chance for the public to be heard. We need to make sure that we have plurality of voices heard. We need to make sure that the media are delivering the kind of information that the public need to raise awareness. And this is the best way to educate the public, right? But I was reading very recent surveys about the Australian public. We know that about 85% of the Australian public want action on climate change. So who do we need to educate? And I really think that because we saw, for example, the extent of the major misinformation campaign that were run, for example, in your country during Brexit, in the US during Trumpism, we saw what climate denialism, for example, can generate. It generates doubts. It delays action. We lost years. Also because we know that there were extremely well-funded lobbyist groups that have been, kind of fostering these global debates that were picked up at the local level and in various countries around the world. Let's try really to make sure that we can have an informed debate. And I'm sure that the public will follow because the public really wants change. The public is already very involved. And the last thing that I might say, I think that obviously we need also to have educational programs in schools, from primary school to secondary school. We need to have them now. And the UNESCO on this has been incredibly active. And I see that actually also in line with the sustainability goals of the UN, they've been really working towards this new framework and try really to work with schools and make sure that we know. But when you look at the statistics, and you know who are the biggest emitters in the world, then you know that it can be a bit daunting, also for kids. Kids are already suing governments around the world because they feel that they have a duty of care that are not respecting. So, there is only so much we can do, but we must absolutely act also on educational objectives as well.
The point about the majority of people, the 85% that you refer to, we need to find a way to translate that into a vote winner and for the politicians to see that climate is a vote winner. It's something I think in Britain we have achieved, that when people go to the, when the electorate goes to vote, it is which party is offering the better climate policies, but we want to see good ones. So I park that out there, maybe as something to come back to when we have an interactive session. Now, business and industry play a vital part. And Derek, it would be great to hear what you are doing as a business and the issues raised in the film, because I know you get a lot of raw materials. So, how do you have sustainable products? How do you source the provenance of your ingredients, for example, that sustainability agenda as part of your corporate social responsibility? It'd be great to hear from you on that front.
Thank you. It's interesting to be here amongst a British-Italian co-production, because as a member of an Italian company, I attended a Cambridge University Sustainable Leadership course here in Australia, and Sir Jonathan Porritt was being very provocative when he got us all, and he put a big C up, a G and an I, and he challenged us on, so who can make change? Who is actually capable of doing something? And he talked about the relative merits of government, the relative merits of consumers, and then he pointed at a group of us from industry. So what can you do? And it really came down to who's got skin in the game here. If industry doesn't, what are you doing? This is your reason to exist, your reason to continue to trade. It's what your consumers will accept. It's what your materials you need for your business. It's what your staff will demand. So with that lens, certainly from a Ferrero point of view, our journey goes back to our origins in 1946. For those who don't know, it's such brands as Tic Tac, Nutella, Ferrero Rocher, Kinder, a little plug. But with that, it's also an organisation with sustainability within its DNA. It's founded on the basis of caring for its employees and caring for the communities in which we operate. 100% of our electricity that we use in Europe is sourced certified renewable. Internationally, as a Ferrero World, 64%. Certainly in the case of palm oil, which is integral in our products, we're very proud that Ferrero sources 100% certified sustainable segregated palm oil. In the case of cocoa, which is another one, we're a confectionery company, of course, it's fundamental to us. Our cocoa is 100% sustainable cocoa, and that's certified working through Rainforest Alliance or with Fair Trade.
We can genuinely enjoy guilt-free chocolate. And I think more and more manufacturing companies, and particularly in the food and drink sector, and we're seeing this in the UK and probably in Italy as well, you choose the product that you believe actually stands up to the sustainability test. Emma and I sat on a panel before in Canberra, so I feel that we're old friends. But you do great work in Australia's coral reefs, which is, so important and vital to the tourism economy for Queensland. And you see firsthand the damage that is being done to them.
I think to begin, if we think about the Great Barrier Reef, It's the size of Italy. It has the reefs globally, 25% of marine biodiversity, yet they cover less than 1% of the ocean floor. So when we're thinking about whether or not we can restore something and the economics of restoring something, we have to think about what that is and what we're trying to restore to, and future-proofing that into the future. So that's one of the challenges that we have to kind of balance. Fundamentally, if we don't tackle climate emissions and climate change, the reef as we know it will not exist beyond our lifetime. I'm pretty certain that it will be unrecognisable. The services, the values that we rely on will not be there into the future. And that's one thing for a country like us here in Australia, but when we think about our Pacific nations, we think about these other countries where individuals' primary food source and the resources that they rely on for their livelihoods are going to be lost, then it's an even more essential system that we're talking about, that if it's lost. So in saying all of that, we think about Australia's Great Barrier Reef, and we've lost about 50% of live coral cover since the 1980s. And in the last 5 years, 3 bleaching events have estimated 30% of the reef's been lost. So that's in our lifetime. So for me, this is also a generational equity issue. I've recently become a mum, and our generation knows the problems, we know what's going on, and yet we're not acting soon enough. And that's really, for me, something that I struggle with, is that we have the solutions now, we know the problems, we know the statistics, but nature's continuing to degrade. On that note, I am an ocean optimist despite all of that, and that's because I do really believe that we have that knowledge, we have the capacity now, and that nature-based solutions, technology-based solutions are part of the toolbox. Without addressing climate change, they're going to be, just putting a patch on an arterial bleed. But they are tools that we have, and I firmly believe that trying to restore reefs, albeit at high value sites, can help build the resilience. And that's really where I see things like science-based solutions, technology, nature-based solutions. It's building resilience so that when the next stress comes, when the next bleaching event comes, that system's got a bit more resilience to deal with it until we get climate action to where it needs to be. So ultimately, for me, we need all of them, but climate action is top.
And that's a great point. There is no single silver bullet.
My question is, it's just undoubtedly true that work is going to be limited if we have a government that up until very recently has flat out denied the effects of climate change. So I really love some comment on the panel, including from you yourself, Your Excellency, about what we do in countries, perhaps like our own in Australia, where we have governments who are opposed to climate action.
I'll come in last, because I think that's the poison chalice part of the question. But perhaps I could invite comment. Maybe Derek, from a business point of view, what are you seeing?
Well, I think it's interesting because what we've determined in the path we've taken, we haven't engaged with government per se. We're doing this because we see our future and what we expect the marketplace and the community expects of us. So my experience, though, and there's members of New South Wales government here at the moment, we've worked as a gold member of Sustainability Advantage now for the best part of 10 years. And it's an outstanding program, and I believe Botanic Gardens are also gold members or members of the project. And through that, we're working, in fact, just only recently we signed, we're part of a state government project related to net zero emissions. So they're actually supporting and fostering us doing work with consulting at our Lithgow factory to help us on the journey that I described earlier. So while I understand what your question is framed at, the living reality of my business and what we're doing is driven from within and what we know to be right for our organisation and what's expected. And then the partnership network that we've developed is going with us.
Any other panel members?
Yeah,
Please,
if I can
Benedetta.
maybe intervene as well. I actually think that without a solid media system that works in a public interest, would be very difficult to also have a solid climate action. And obviously here I'm also a political economist of communication, so obviously I have a scholarly bias in this because I obviously think that media have to perform in the interest of democracy. And because I do comparative studies, I know that countries where you have a more pluralistic media environment, actually, they can have also a more open environment, and therefore maybe messages like the ones that we are debating tonight about the need to be more ambitious, for example, the need, to move from the 1% reduction to the almost 50%, gets conveyed and gets communicated. The problem in countries, for example, like this one, where you have the highest concentrated media environment in the world, is that if we are having this conversation tonight and we agree that something needs to be done and very quickly, no one would be reporting on this. It would be silenced, just as possibly, some of the news about the really depressing ranking of this country in the climate index. Australia, unfortunately, is being ranked as one of the worst in the world for climate policy. And I'm sorry that I have to give you this news, but I'm sure that you haven't read about this, because only The Guardian had a very, very small news, a piece of news that reported on this. Why is that? So this is really an urgent issue for the democracy of the country. Now, we know that we had the Leveson inquiry in 2012 in the UK, and not only the government, we had a fantastic hearing and a fantastic set of incredible intervention, and we know that it was discussed, it was openly discussed. The public intervened. There were major also activist groups that tried to put pressure. And there was a debate about it. Like the media were reporting on it. Do you see any reporting about the media diversity inquiry at the moment, for example, in this country? These are major issues because when I speak, for example, with environmentalists that are trying to get their message across, they say, where are the media? And I'm saying, I keep inviting as a media scholar the media, but the media are not here to actually convey the message and convey the urgency. But there are ways to intervene. So, I'm an optimistic. I think that this can be absolutely addressed. And so when I see, climate inaction, I'm sure, has also to do with this problem of, lack of action in addressing this media failure, which is huge. I think at the moment it's the second biggest problem, for example, in this country. So first we have a climate emergency, and secondly we have a media emergency in this country.
Well,
Can I add a Please do, Denise. So I'm unfortunately, and don't kill me for it, but I'm unfortunately part government. And I get in trouble all the time because I'm always speaking out. And obviously sometimes you just have to be silenced if you're not following the agenda. And I think one of the things, when I see 40,000 young people in the Domain telling us we have to do something, there is this need for action. But legislative within Australia, and I'll go back from a law perspective, is we have a Commonwealth, but we also have a lot of state. And state has a lot of control. And unless we come together in one solid answer to this problem, I think we just have to keep being a voice. And every day I will be sitting there saying, did you go to the Gosport fires? We shouldn't have had an unprecedented fire like that. This is what's happening. I've got salt water coming in over the wall over here. I've got loss of, 60% of species. It's not just a fuzzy koala in a picture. I've actually got habitat loss. And, we are degrading our land. We are doing all of those things. But what we're not understanding is how do we change people's perceptions, particularly from an agricultural space, where there is this value and economy in there, but they're just not wanting to change. But you haven't got a solid-led Commonwealth policy, and I'm not saying disrespecting to anyone doing that, but how do you get every state person on board to stop worrying about my 4-year plan? And I will probably get in trouble if anyone's writing this from my minister. But it's not about mid-year, midterm. It's not about my 4 years. It's about a proper understanding of a policy that is for the future and not just my wins. And that's a really hard thing. So every day we tend to struggle with everything I'm trying to do. The way I try and get funding is always I'm trying to look at what's that political word I can say that's going to let the minister know that I can make something good today.
I know Francesca's standing right here next to me. Look, we are working very closely with the Australian government to make the force of the argument that there are not binary choices between targets and a technology roadmap. We use the evidence of what is happening in our own countries and other countries, delivering the transformation and the change, which delivers economic benefit and the transition of your economy. Every economy, whether a developed economy, a developing economy, an emerging economy, needs to find its own sovereign path towards achieving the ambition we are asking everyone to hold. And to be fair to the Australian government, we are seeing a shift in the rhetoric, which is a positive shift. We have some months to go yet before COP26. So the work Italy and the UK are doing in leading the partnership to COP26 is part of the equation. We are all working closely with the government here on the technology roadmap. Ultimately, new technology needs to come into this country. It will be foreign investment that helps to drive that, and a message from investors, because it's a message that investors give us in the UK. We need clarity and we need a framework. The policy arguments for why you will set different settings are absolutely important to the kind of investment you're looking for in your economy. So we will continue to make the economic case. We will continue to work with the Australian government, who have increased their contribution to the Climate Fund, who have joined the Blue Ocean Alliance. So those are all hugely positive contributions to the global agenda. And yes, we would love to see Australia commit formally to net zero by 2050. Your government needs to make this decision on their own, knowing that they have the support within their party and their coalition partner. And that's a matter for the Australian government. We can only encourage, we can only share the knowledge that we have, the experience that we have, knowing that that should be the outcome of a decision. The other thing I think I take from this conversation, and both Francesca's and my teams who are in the room will probably not thank me for the suggestion, but maybe we need to add an event in our program of activity with journalists here and the major media. So let's do that. To pick up your point, Benedetta.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
And we'll invite you along to be part of that.
I'll be here.
Okay, I'm conscious of time because, sorry, Francesca.
Yeah, I just feel the duty to comment on this. First of all, I share 100% what Vicky said. But I want still also to add, to say that the Italy, UK, but also other stakeholders, we do have a dialogue with the government. And we continue really to engage every day in what is, in my view, very, very positive and fruitful discussion. For example, the kickoff event of this series took place in Canberra a few days ago, and we had a very serious conversation with Minister Susan Ley, with Jamie Isbister, Ambassador for Environment and Chief Negotiator for COP26, and many others. So, and they are not shying away from this conversation with us. We have identified a lot of areas for improvement, but to be honest, we are all in the same position because I said it before, overall Italy is okay, but there is room for improvement also in our records. And I think we have been going through very difficult years, and with major stakeholders, like-minded countries that, for example, took very unfortunate decisions, for instance, to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. But the Australian government decided not to do this, and it was not a given at that time. The second point I want to make, second and last, is that I really see a shift in the public opinion on the importance of climate change. And it happened after the terrible bushfire season that, you know, we cannot call it a bushfire season. It was a disaster for the entire humankind. And so each of us has a role to play. And this is why we are also, you know, in a way trying to stimulate this type of debates. So we have 2 events to add on our list, one with the journalist and one with good stories that comes from Australian companies like Lend-Lease and many others. And third point, sorry, I forgot to mention, this is important, the state level. You know, you can look at the glass, half empty or half full, but it is definitely true that there is a lot of devolution of responsibility at state level. And at state level, in some states in particular, things are not that bad. There are states like South Australia that already committed to a net zero carbon by 2050. So, yeah, it's not enough, but there is hope that things are moving in a better direction, I believe. This is my impression, this is my assessment as a diplomat living in this country for 1.5 years at least. So I'm an optimistic person, I know, but I think it's important to engage, you know, constructively, and rather than with a confrontational approach that does not lead us anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you. I know I saw a couple of other hands, but I have been given the signal that we need to move on to watch the film. There may be an opportunity at the end of the film, before we all disperse, if there are particular points anyone wants to make to Francesca or myself or other members of the panel, please do so. Can I invite the panel to take their seats?
Our planet is home to a seemingly infinite variety of species, from ocean giants to the tiniest insects.
Sometimes, when a female giant anteater dies on the road, her pup will survive. But we have found roadkill decreases the population growth rate of anteaters by half.
There's a wave of revolution going around, especially with the young people. We are waking up, we are realizing that the planet is an integral part of our existence.
If we don't act now, the youth of today and the youth of tomorrow are going to look back on this generation with absolute horror. What were you thinking?
I want to tell her that we have taken the lessons, that we will not allow any other species to walk this tragic road of extinction.
One thing we do know is that if nature is given the chance, it can bounce back.
40 years ago, I had one of the most memorable experiences of my life. It just shows what we can achieve when we put our minds to it. I do truly believe that together we can create a better future. I might not be here to see it, but if we make the right decisions at this critical moment, we can safeguard our planet's ecosystems, its extraordinary biodiversity, and all its inhabitants. What happens next is up to every one of us.